Crusader Kings 3's best feature is also the one that makes the game worth playing over CK2 in particular, because it's one that fundamentally changes the game and brings a newfound sense of dynamism and player agency to it. I'm talking about cultural and religious osmosis, about bringing people together or apart, and about leading realms that feel historical and immersive because of it. This mechanic might in fact technically be two different ones, but I bundled them together because they deal with the same thing, allowing us to tailor our way of life over time and to do one thing that almost no other strategy game allows us to do: simulate actual historical melting pots. And if you like the idea of that, I hope you'll consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Oh, and join my Discord too to talk to awesome people about games you love. And now back to CK3. You see, the reason I love strategy games, at least why I love the best ones, is because they let me play out my historical fantasies of either simulating or going against historical currents, of managing armies as well as cultures and faiths. In most Paradox games, cultures and faiths are mostly static, meaning that there is a binary relationship between cultures A and B, or religion X and Y. For the most part, these two or more will always stand in inherent opposition to each other in most games, so you'll either always be promoting Protestantism or Catholicism, Orthodoxy or one of the branches of Islam, Hinduism, and others. Of course, these games will sometimes simulate a warming of relations between peoples through a mechanic like cultural or religious acceptance, meaning that people of different identities view each other in a better light despite being of those different identities. This is a nice mechanic to have, and it's often valid too, since in many cases, multicultural societies do see an increase in acceptance of other peoples and their beliefs or backgrounds. Thing is though, CK3 actually features cultural acceptance as well, something which is increased by actively promoting it with an advisor, making use of your ruler's perks, or by learning languages and spending time with rulers of other realms. This would be the more passive part of cultural acceptance in CK3, but is in many ways the only way of doing things elsewhere. Now this is all well and good on its own, but where things truly take a turn for the much better in CK3 is when we begin talking about cultural hybridization and religious reform, which work in different ways but have many of the same awesome de facto outcomes, like the ability to alter or even change your culture. For a while, yes, you can in fact adopt a completely different culture if the conditions are met, say if you become the vassal of a foreign ruler, or importantly, if you choose to either reform or diverge from your culture, which is what this video is all about. Reforming cultures mainly allows you to change and swap ethos and your traditions at the cost of a ton of prestige depending on your current cultural traits. This means if you have room for new traditions, you can add new ones to your cultural repertoire, or again, you can exchange a current one for an entirely new one, even though the new tradition should belong to a foreign culture originally. The amount of prestige the new tradition costs is however calculated based on your current cultural traits and your ruler's circumstances, and whether these are aligned with the new tradition or not. In other words, reforming cultures allow you to remain within the boundaries of your own people, while slightly navigating new paths within it, opening up new opportunities without losing out on the old ways and alienating the people around you. Diverging cultures, on the other hand, is a much more radical, but also potentially a lot more game-changing mechanic. Because diverging your culture means you can essentially reinvent your culture as you see fit, while keeping the base factors of language, heritage, martial customs, and aesthetics, even though this can be changed to a later model if you choose. However, diverging cultures do potentially cost a lot of prestige depending on the cultural pillar and the traditions you choose to change and adopt. Diverging cultures is not just a cool feature because you can tailor your culture within an existing system, but because diverging it will lower the number of cities associated with that new culture, meaning that the progress increase of culture fascinations, which is determined by the development level in counties of your culture, is likely to increase, since your personal counties are likely to be of higher development than the entirety of your former culture. That's a lot of culture. Now that was a bit of a mouthful, so I'll make it simple. The smaller your culture is, chances are you're able to be a bit more innovative, since you're likely to have invested into developing your core provinces where your new culture will have its core. However, there is one more way for you to mix up your culture, and that is through hybrid cultures, which works quite differently. A hybrid culture can only be created when the cultural acceptance between two cultures is high enough, meaning that they tolerate or even accept each other, and when the other culture is present in your kingdom. When those conditions are met, you can then join your culture with the other, and instead of adopting entirely new ethos or traditions, choose between the existing ones, meaning you get to pick and choose which, or sometimes both, aspects of each culture might best suit your playstyle and situation. Honestly, this is such a cool option and lends so much immersion to regions in the world where multiple cultures exist within the same realm, or particularly cultural dynamic places, like in Iberia or Sicily for example. And when everything is factored in, I don't really know of any other game that focuses this much on the cultural distinctiveness and their malleability. And for so many different cultures, seeing as there are literally hundreds of cultures present here, each with their own unique makeup of language, aesthetics, heritage, traditions, and ethos. And for so many different cultures. Closely linked with culture is religion, and if there's one thing that symbolizes and puts its mark on the medieval era, it's arguably religion itself. But Crusader Kings 3 doesn't take the easy way out like certain other games and simply divides this world into Christian and Muslim. On the contrary, it thrives in diversity. There are just so many religions here, so many possible denominations and sects, that it is a veritable treasure trove of spiritual choice. From Catholicism to Orthodoxy and beyond, to Asatru, to the dozens of Muslim and Hindu branches, to the various steppe and African pagan religions, there are so many varying faiths to choose from or be born into. But they're not just differentiated in theory, nor just by aesthetics, but by a true multitude of aspects that have real consequences for how your game is played. The arguably most visible aspect of any religion are its tenets, since these are in many ways action-based features, allowing you to do or partake in things you might otherwise not have. For example, Catholicism's armed pilgrimages allows the head of faith to declare a great holy war, i.e. crusades, and puts emphasis on the importance of pilgrimages. Communion allows characters to pay gold to the head of faith to seek indulgences, and the head of faith can excommunicate their own followers. And monasticism allows unlanded characters to become monks, essentially stripping them of the power to marry and inherit titles, effectively creating a society with a spiritual social class. Orthodoxy, on the other hand, differs slightly, not allowing for crusades like Catholicism, but instead offering the pentarchy, a tenet which does emphasize pilgrimages like the former, but which also adds religious fervor per held holy site. Now, holy sites are specific important locations to your religion, and holding them gives your religion more fervor, i.e. how simple it is to convert and to be converted, for heresies to pop up, and so on. Each religion comes with their very own sins and virtues, actions which are considered to be either good or evil, and which determine how other people of said faith treat you. Sins and virtues vary greatly between religions, so whereas being wrathful is a virtue in the Asatru religion, it's actually a sin in the Buddhist Theravada faith. This means that while you should strive to be liked by your fellow members of faith, it can be wise to at least consider how other faiths look upon you, as you might come into contact with them sooner rather than later, and wish to solve certain matters diplomatically rather than just with the business end of a sword. But a religion is more than sins and virtues and holy wars. They also each have their own doctrines, and these are the facets which largely determine which actions are acceptable and possible within a religion. So while Asatru is a pluralist faith, meaning they don't necessarily discriminate against other faiths, both Catholicism and the Ash'ari-made Muslim faith consider themselves to be righteous, giving them a significant opinion penalty of characters belonging to other faiths. Doctrines govern who can marry who, whether divorce is allowed, how to deal with bastards, whether same-sex relations, adultery, deviancy, witchcraft or kinslaying is legal or not in the eyes of the faith, and the role of the clergy, whether they can marry, the positions they can hold in society, and which gender may hold clerical positions. As you can tell, every single one of these doctrines varies slightly to greatly between faiths, and it makes each character and their own religion that much more unique to play as, making every campaign with a different faith different. But the kicker is that these are only the religions that are available by default. You see, not only may you convert your faith to another one and hope that your family and vassal members follow in your footsteps, but depending on your faith, you may either reform or create an entirely new faith based on the current one. Reforming a faith essentially institutionalizes it and requires that you control most of its holy places. In doing so, you may change the various tenets and doctrines of your faith as far as your own piety level allows, with more changes costing you more piety. Once reformed though, you may create an entirely new faith within the said faith, but this time you get to change the faith's name as well. The main difference is that while reforming a faith essentially encourages the rest of your former faith members to adopt the new reformed one, a new branching religion is essentially considered a heresy or at least being astray, and it's not very likely that the rest of the former faith members will follow you without cause. Changing and adopting religions isn't just a great gameplay mechanic in a role-playing sense, in the same way that culture is, but it also allows for immersive and historical gameplay routes. Creating new faiths allow you to adopt new tenets and doctrines, creating religions that showcase either the disputes or the coming together of various faiths into one, in many ways like they sometimes did in Iberia and Sicily and elsewhere. In terms of how fundamental gameplay mechanics work, while they might not be at the very forefront all the time, cultures and religions are my favorite aspects of CK3 because of how deep they actually go, even though they might take you a significant time to understand and actually invest in them. Overall, CK3 has done a fantastic job of not just offering the player a multitude of ways to play them, but has at the same time created one of the deepest and most representative visions of the medieval era, and its corresponding cultures, ethnicities, and faiths to date in any piece of media. And that is something to be celebrated. I love how deep CK3 goes in societal changes and cultural and religious changes like these, and it makes for a much better game, so much so that it alone manages to tempt me away from my arguably more beloved CK2. But what do you think about these features? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and join the Discord for more. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Cheers!